get the facts, analyze the facts, arrive at a decision, and then act upon that decision. Sounds obvious, right? Yeah, Aristotle thought the same thing, and if you and I are to solve our worry problems and stop our worry from making our days and nights hell, then we should act on that as well. In this video, I'm going to give you 4 practical questions you can ask yourself to stop worrying and start living. But before that, the story of Galen Litchfield. Galen Litchfield is one of the most successful American businessmen in the Far East, in China. Unfortunately, this was 1942. Right after Pearl Harbor, Galen Litchfield was in Shanghai when the Japanese invaded Shanghai. And what happened was the Japanese sent to Galen Litchfield at the time what was called an army liquidator. Now this army liquidator was actually an admiral in disguise. So if you pissed him off, he could have shot you and he could have killed you on the spot. Litchfield at the time was the manager of the Asia Life Insurance Company. And so what the Japanese wanted to do was, since they had occupied and taken over Shanghai, they wanted Litchfield to liquidate, sell all of the company's assets and donate it to Japan, right? Donate it to the Japanese army so they could continue the war, continue the cause. And so Galen Litchfield did what he was told, went through the motions of preparing a list of total assets for the Japanese because he had no alternative. But what he did do was he purposely left out a block of securities worth about $750,000 because technically the $750,000 was part of their Hong Kong operation and not part of their Shanghai operation. Nevertheless, he was afraid, worried, might I add, that if the Japanese found out that he might be in some trouble. And guess what? The Japanese found out. And Galen Litchfield wasn't even there when they found out. In fact, it was his head accountant that was there. And apparently, at that time, the admiral spun into a rage. He stamped, he yelled, he called Galen Litchfield a traitor to the Japanese army. And man, he knew what was up. In that time, he was like, oh no, I'm gonna be thrown into the bridge house. The bridge house was a torture chamber by the Japanese, and he had personally known friends that would have rather died. In fact, they did take their own lives because they didn't want to be thrown into that torture chamber. He had other friends that were thrown into the torture chamber only to be found dead 10 days later. Needless to say, it was quite the predicament. He was worried because his life was on the line. So what did Galen Litchfield do? Well, supposedly he should have been terrified, and he said he would have been totally terrified if he didn't have the way that he usually approaches problems. According to Galen, whenever he was worried about something, he would have a 2-question system that he would use to address the problems, and as soon as he wrote the answers to those 2 questions down, he stopped worrying altogether because he got a clearer picture. Now, what were those 2 questions? The first question he asked was, what is he really worried about? Well, he's worried about being thrown into the bridge house tomorrow on Monday and possibly dying. And after writing that down, he wrote down the second question, which is, what can he do about it? And after really thinking a lot, he came down with 4 things that he could actually do to address the problem. Well, the first thing that he could do, he could try to explain himself to the admiral. But unfortunately, the admiral himself does not speak English, so he would have to do it through an interpreter. And if he does that, there might be miscommunication, and the admiral might not even bother explaining things to him. The admiral might just throw him in the bridge house because talking is too troublesome. Now, this admiral was a cruel man, so if he threw him into the bridge house, he would have died for sure. So moving on to option number 2, he could run away, right? Like he could escape, except that was impossible. The Japanese army kept track of where he is all the time. And he was in his hotel, and if he wanted to leave the hotel, he had to check out and check in when he was back at the hotel. And the Japanese would know that he escaped, and he would be captured and shot on the spot. That leaves him with the third choice, which was to stay in his hotel room and not do anything, to avoid the admiral. Now this would raise suspicion. It would be so suspicious that the admiral might just send men to the hotel room, pick him up, and directly throw him into the bridge house, because the admiral knew about the money already. Now there's actually a fourth choice that he could take. Maybe if he went to the office on Monday as usual, as if nothing happened, as if he didn't know anything, maybe the admiral would be so busy that he wouldn't even notice Galen. He wouldn't have time to deal with him. Or the admiral might have had some time to cool off and might not be angry anymore and might just leave it at that. Might not say anything. Now, even if the admiral said something, Galen at that point in time would have a chance to explain himself, a chance to talk to the admiral about it. All of a sudden, if he took this fourth choice, he would have two chances, right? He would have two chances. One, he could explain himself, or nothing could even happen. And so as soon as he realized that this was one of the options, he felt immediately relieved. And so Monday morning came by, he strolled into the office as if nothing happened. As he walked past the admiral's desk, the admiral had a cigarette in his mouth and glared at him, just stared at him. But you know what? He usually does that. And then he never said a word. And 6 weeks later, the admiral was gone. The admiral was back in Tokyo. His crisis had passed. I think Galen Litchfield's experience tells us a lot about worry. And it's the idea that worry often comes from our sense of uncertainty. Because when we're uncertain, we overthink things. The moment we write things down, the moment we ask the right questions, we answer them, the moment we figure out what we can do and then choose something to do and then do it, we stop thinking about the possibilities and focus on walking. We start walking down the path that gives us the best possible outcome. In the words of Galen Litchfield, he says, "Experience has proved to me time after time the enormous value of arriving at a decision. It is the failure to arrive at a fixed purpose, the inability to stop going round and round in maddening circles that drives men to nervous breakdowns and living hells. I find that 50% of my worries vanish once I arrive at a clear, definite decision. And another 40% usually vanishes once I start to carry out that decision. So I banish about 90% of my worries by taking these 4 steps. Number 1, writing down precisely what I am worrying about. Number 2, writing down what I can do about it. Number 3, deciding what to do. And number 4, start immediately to carry out that decision. So here's the punchline, or punch questions. Why don't you start using Galen Litchfield's techniques right now to one of your worries, either in life or in business? Ask yourself these 4 questions. Question number 1, what are you worrying about, and what is the cause of that worry? Write it down. Question number 2, what are all the possible solutions? What can you do about the problem or the worry? Write that down. Question number 3, what will you do about it? What is the best solution? And then finally, question number 4, when are you going to start? When are you going to start solving this problem? And hopefully the answer to that question is as soon as possible. So there you have it, folks. 4 questions that allow you to address your worries. These are definitely different from another 4 points that I did in an earlier video, but I hope you found it helpful as well. Remember to smash the like button if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, and also subscribe to my channel. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see you next time. Oh, by the way, you might have noticed a change in scenery around me. I am now officially back in China. School has just started, and so I'm excited. This is my apartment back in China. I'm no longer in Vancouver, and I'm just excited for another year where I get to teach some kids some accounting and entrepreneurship, and it'll be a good year. Bye.